Our final interview is with Delia Browne, the Director of the National Copyright Unit. All schools use copyrighted material, so it's important to know what schools need to keep in mind when using published works like books, films and music.
Delia, thanks for joining us. What is copyright and why does it exist?
So copyright is a set of exclusive rights that are granted to owners of certain types of material. So that's whether it's artistic work with images, photographs, whether it's text-based works, which could be newspapers, novels, textbooks. It could be stuff from the internet, newspaper articles or teaching and learning materials that have been put up on the internet. It could be films and videos or YouTube videos, or it could be music, whether it's like on a old CD or whether it's on something you buy from Google Play or Apple. So all those types of creative material, they have certain rights which are granted to the copyright owners.
How do we ensure that schools use copyrighted materials legally and properly?
Well, fortunately, in our Copyright Act, there are a series of exceptions, free use exceptions that allow schools in certain circumstances to be able to use material for educational purposes without having to go and get permission from the copyright owner. There are a number of exceptions that, like, playing a film to a class or music to a class or displaying some material from an interactive whiteboard, when you get students to recite poems or read from books in classes or perform music as part of their classes. This is all covered by a particular type of exception. We have another exception in the Act that also we call flexible dealing. This allows teachers and schools to, in certain circumstances, copy bits of sound recordings and film for educational instruction in the classroom. We have another exception in the Act that allows us to do copying for exams. This includes copying for online exams, so there's exceptions there. We also have, in Australia's Copyright Act, two compulsory licences. One of the compulsory licences, I call it the statutory text and artistic licence, and that allows schools to copy texts and images for educational purposes with some certain rules attached to it. And the schools actually pay, sectors pay money to the Copyright Agency, which is the Collecting Society, who then uses that money to pay the appropriate copyright owners of the material that schools use. We have another licence which is administered by Screen Rights. This allows schools to copy radio and television programs and to use them for educational purposes. Again, like the licence the schools have with copyright agencies, schools pay licence fees to Screen Rights, which Screen Rights then uses to distribute the relevant licence fees to the relevant copyright owners of TV and radio broadcasts.
Are there any activities that aren't covered by any of these agreements?
Putting things on school websites, that is not covered by any of our agreements, because our agreements are just limited to things that happen inside the school, making material available for students to access, not the wide world to access. So if you have a school website which you're putting things on which are other people's materials, and a good example of this would be, it's quite common for schools to want to promote what the kids are reading. And so the newsletter or the website might have the book of the month, and they may have the book of the month cover as an image, and they may also have reproduced perhaps a review from Goodreads. Now these types of activity, this type of reproduction is not covered by any of our exceptions or by our licence arrangements.
What are open educational resources and how widely are they used in Australian schools?
Open education resources, often known as OER, are resources that are free for teachers and schools to access, use, modify and share without having to worry about whether it fits under one of the Australia's copyright exceptions or one of our kind of licenses that we've negotiated with collecting societies. And it covers a whole range of different types of material, whether they are like textbooks, student activities, interactive quiz, games, videos, any sort of teaching resource. And they are generally licensed under a Creative Commons license, and Creative Commons license is like a suite of licenses which basically a copyright owner can just put a Creative Commons label and link to the license terms on their works, and you know by looking at that little label what you can do with that work, whether you can, and all Creative Commons licenses allow you to use things for free with a minimum requirement that you just attribute the copyright owner when you use it. And increasingly we're seeing teaching and learning resources being licensed under Creative Commons. ACARA, the national curriculum, is licensed under a Creative Commons by license. And you're increasingly seeing some Catholic school offices and dioceses, when they're producing teaching and learning materials for use in their schools, they're also licensing those materials under Creative Commons. And the idea behind the whole OER movement, because it is a movement, is that basically taxpayers shouldn't have to pay twice for stuff that's already been used. And we also want to make stuff, you know, if we're producing materials that we want our teachers to use, Creative Commons or licensed material or OER licensed material basically now allows the teacher to do what they naturally do in a classroom. And what they do in classrooms and with each other is modify and share. It makes things much easier and for teachers to understand. It's, you know, it's internet enabled and compatible. It makes people feel safer that what they're doing is right and they're actually compliant with copyright.
What consequences are there for schools or teachers who use copyrighted material in a way that's not compliant?
99% of the time, from our experience, the National Copyright Unit, teachers are doing the right thing. And I have a little rule for people. I said, if you really can't get your head around the complex rules, apart from going to the Smart Copying website and talking to the National Copyright Unit, there's probably 3 things you need to think about. Limit what you use. Really just use what you need for those purposes. The next thing you should think about is making sure that you label, that you always attribute the material that you're using. The third thing I say to them is like link. Link, 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 link. If you are now working in the 21st century and you're using a lot of online material, if you link to websites or deal with stuff like embedding websites and resources, that's actually not a copy or communication for copyright purposes, because that link's taking you directly to that website. You're not actually making a copy.
One of the most common things that schools use is music, and they use it in a lot of different contexts. And I see them now putting a lot of things on websites where there's things that have happened at school and they set it to some popular song. What do they need to be aware of in those circumstances?
Yeah, like music is kind of complicated for schools. It's also just complicated generally for anyone trying to deal with copyright in the world, so making that point there. So we do have 3 different licenses that the schools have negotiated with the music collecting societies. We have a license which deals with making copies of sheet music. We have another license that deals with performance of music at a school, and that might be performing music at school concerts. We have another license, which is the APRA-AMCOS ARIA license that deals with school events. And that school event license, there's lots of things that schools do. There's sports days, there's graduations, there's assemblies. It's fine to be playing music on sports days and graduations. That's covered by this particular agreement. But what about if I want to do what we call a commemoration DVD, which we want to, of particular school events, and that has music on it, and we want to sell those to schools on a cost recovery basis. That's actually allowed under our APRA-AMCOS ARIA, I call the school event license. So those sort of things are permitted. We also have in that license the ability to stream a school event live on our website for parents who can't make it to be there. But then what we don't have, of course, is a license that allows us to put that up on the web indefinitely, or up on YouTube indefinitely.
Delia Browne, the Director of the National Copyright Unit. Let's review her key points on copyright in schools. Copyright law regulates the use of creative works by writers, composers, producers and copyright owners. Schools may use certain copyrighted materials under free use exceptions for educational purposes, including online exams. Flexible dealing allows teachers and schools to copy parts of sound recordings and film for educational instruction in the classroom. Schools must pay to use certain copyrighted material, such as images, text and sound recordings, through a licence. A school must obtain permission to put copyrighted material, such as music, on its website. Open educational resources are free for teachers and schools to access, use, modify and share. Materials with a Creative Commons licence can be used freely, subject to the copyright owner's conditions, including attribution. Schools can avoid online copyright infringement by linking to copyrighted material instead of copying it. Copyright is a complex subject, so to find out more, go to smartcopying.edu.au. Let's go now to our first quiz. As with previous modules, you'll need to get at least 80% correct in each quiz to successfully complete the module. If you need to check anything, simply go back using the menu on the side of the page.